doing. And I'd like to welcome all the page members, page up members, and a few guests who are here with us, and wonderful speakers who we'll be hearing from for being here with us. As Amer said, this is kind of a different approach to a meeting, and we're looking forward to getting past the opening speeches and getting to the point where we're having more conversation and dialogue, because we want to really fulfill the brand promise that Amer was talking about, which is to provide members with really important, actionable, relevant, right now content, and more opportunities to engage with each other around that. And that's what we're here for the next couple of days to do. In fact, Amer and Peter Debrasini and Johnny Wada, who will be here tomorrow and Friday, and I and a few other colleagues have been on a mission around the world for a little better part of a year now, a little over a year now. We visited a number of cities and talked to well over 100 page members about what they're seeing and what's going on in the world and the challenges that they're facing, and really trying to understand where we should be going as an organization, as leaders within the profession. We believe that it's not really helpful or useful to ask people what they think the future might be 5 or 10 years from now. What we're asking people is, what are you doing today? Because we believe that the future is already arriving, it's just not widely distributed, but we can find bits and pieces of leadership here and there and kind of put it all together and then test it with each other, which we've been doing. We first released, or sort of ran through this hypothesis, if you will, at the spring seminar in New York a month or two ago. And that's what, in fact, what we're going to be doing with you over the next couple of days, is laying out our hypothesis, asking you to engage with us and with each other around it so that we can continue to learn from each other and refine it. We're continuing to kind of evolve our thinking as we go. We started with an hypothesis, and to a significant extent, it's been ratified and enriched and deepened. But along the way, we've found new pieces and pieces of things that we hadn't quite thought of. They're now fitting in. And every time we talk to someone about it, we get a new little insight that we bring together. So we're looking forward to having that kind of engagement with you over the next couple of days. So what I'm going to do now is give you kind of a high-level introduction, and then we're going to deep dive over the next couple of days and culminate on Friday morning with breakout sessions where we're really going to dig into the progression paths, which I'll explain in a moment, and get your feedback and reaction to those, because we know they're not right yet. In fact, in a sense, this work is never done, right? It just continues to evolve as we go. But we need your thinking and your input, so that's why we're here. We started out with kind of a feeling based on some work that Johnny Wada had done at IBM for Ginny Rometty right before he retired from there just about a year ago, for a conference that she wanted to do. And she had invited 100 CEOs, and she asked him to interview them. And he came away from that with the feeling that each and every enterprise that he talked to is experiencing some kind of disruptive forces. That it's quite a remarkable moment, in fact. And as we've gone around the world and talked to over 100 page members, to a person, they have said, yes, we're experiencing that as well. So we believe that there is a major disruptive change going on facing all of our institutions all over the world. We talk to CCOs, we talk to agency CEOs, we talk to executive search firms that are working with CEOs to hire CCOs, and we think we're starting to get a pretty good sense of what the reality is that's out there. Some of it are the kinds of socio-political, geographic, demographic change that Jan Peter has been talking to us about over the past little bit of time. And thank you again for your insights on this. Even before the current sort of trade battles between the US and China and other countries, there has been kind of a decline in overall world trade. We've been experiencing over the past decade or so some level of economic growth around the world, but there are no questions about that. The Federal Reserve Board is meeting in Washington today. The ECB is also meeting, trying to determine whether they need to kind of go a little slightly different direction because of concerns about growth. All of these issues are facing us. At the same time, there are technology-fueled new kinds of business models that are changing and disrupting entire sectors. And CEOs are having to rethink, who are we? Why do we exist? What business are we in? What value do we create? And how do we have to change in order to continue to add that value? A lot of these are technology-based, but some of them are based on climate change and changing consumer needs and desires as well, all of which are coming together to make, again, almost every enterprise that we've talked to feel that they're facing disruptive changes that require them to rethink who they are. Interestingly, when John asked the CEOs he was interviewing, what is the single biggest obstacle to successful transformation, to a single person, they said culture. The ability to change. They know where they want to go. They have an idea of the new business model that they can create. They've started to rethink what their real value is. But how do you get an enterprise that's been around for a long time, or even a new enterprise that's sort of heading in a certain direction, to really rethink itself and change? And culture change is kind of the biggest obstacle to that. So we find that CEOs are looking for help as they think through this. How do we change? How do we redefine the company? How do we change it? How do we make the culture change? Not necessarily looking for the CCO. In fact, in some cases, they're creating new kinds of C-suite titles, Chief Transformation Officer, et cetera. So we see a true opportunity for the CCO to step up here, but also potentially existential disruption for the CCO as well if we do not step up, because we will be displaced or replaced by others who have the capability and the willingness to step up and do the work that we think is necessary. The second major finding, which will not surprise you, is that societal issues are an intensifying force. Rising employee expectations in the workplace of our organizations to create real value in the world and to speak out on issues. As Jan Peter mentioned, even Larry Fink is now demanding that companies in which BlackRock invests to create social value. And in fact, as we've gone around the world, we've become convinced that he's far from alone. In fact, there is a mainstreaming wide movement of investment leaders who are looking for sustainability and insisting that companies think more this way. We've had some conversations with Larry's, the person who runs the sustainable investment work for Larry Fink, and Michelle Edkins is her name, and she's indicated that they are really wanting to work with CCOs to convince CCOs to help the enterprise rethink around social value. So we have an opportunity for a partnership there, and we've begun to have a little bit of a conversation with Helle Bank-Jorgensen about possibly doing some conversations with her in the same way, and she'll be speaking to us about it this evening. The third major trend that we see is this really disturbing trend toward misuse of technology and so-called weaponization of information. The proliferation of bots, of trolling, of falsehoods that are much more likely to be retweeted. We all sort of live in our bubbles, and sometimes inadvertently we see things that we think ought to be true and probably are true, and so we send them around, and the more emotional and false they are, actually the more likely they are to be retweeted. And it's now becoming technologically possible to really to create things that aren't true. This was actually a pretty lousy version of that when this video, they just basically slowed down a video of Speaker Pelosi at a conference and made it appear that she was drunk. But it was retweeted, sent around millions of times before it was sort of exposed. But the ability to make actually believable and hard to detect realistic videos of people saying things they didn't say. You've probably seen or at least heard about this Jordan Peele Obama tape. I decided not to play it, but if you haven't seen it, you should just Google it and look at it. It's funny, but not, if you know what I mean. These are the findings: existential moment, social issues, and weaponization of information. So what do we do about it? What's the challenge that we face, and how can we help the CEO with this need to transform the organizations that they serve? The CCO imperative, and it won't surprise you, those of you who are familiar with the page model, that we're building it around the page model, which we still believe really holds true. First and foremost, help the CEO redefine the organization to truly be what it should be as it transforms itself. We can play a role there. And then secondly, to build stakeholder trust around that, using technology and working against this weaponization of information. So those are the two areas. Within those, let's start with corporate character. What is that? Basically, and we've said this almost for over a decade with the authentic enterprise, if an enterprise truly wants to be trusted, it must authentically be what it claims to be. And therefore, as Arthur Page often said, public relations is 90% what you do and only 10% talking about it. So the first job of the CCO is to help the enterprise define itself and truly become what it wants to be. Mission, purpose, values, culture, business model, strategy, brand, policy, and positions, all defined and aligned to create the unique differentiating whole that is the organization, and then to make it real and truly authentic by becoming that. So, what can we do now in today's world? And the work that we've done recently sort of takes it to a new level in terms of how we see the CCO stepping up in this time of disruption to help the CEO redefine the enterprise. Who are we? What do we believe? How do we act? What unique value do we create? How do we redefine ourselves and make it attainable? And we see that these have to be based on a definition of our mission, purpose, and values. And there are kind of three doors, if you will, that are ways in for the CCO to help the CEO with this redefinition of corporate character. These three things are not uniquely separate. In fact, they kind of all go together. But each one provides an opportunity for a different door into that process of working across the enterprise in a meaningful way, not just to define the mission, purpose, and values, but to activate them across the enterprise in a way that they become totally real. So, the first is brand. We think of corporate brand as the totality of everything that is seen, heard, and experienced through every touch point. We commonly call this in corporate communications corporate reputation, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you have responsibility for corporate reputation and you think about it not just as the storytelling trying to make people think we're good, but actually defining the touch points that create the reputation, then that works as well. But the reason brand is now coming to the fore for us is we were surprised as we went around the world and talked to over 100 CCOs, the number of whom say, oh yes, I own corporate brand now. We've historically thought about brand as something the marketers own, and certainly in a product brand sense that's true. But more and more CCOs are telling us we own the brand, and it gives us an opportunity to redefine the organization, who we are, what we stand for, and then again to work across the enterprise to make that real. We're going to hear from a couple of colleagues later today, Dan Lockman from MHI and Miguel Vega-Pisana from Reckitt Benckiser about some of the work that they're doing in this area. Just as an example of that, the work that John did at IBM, redefining IBM around Smarter Planet, wasn't a marketing campaign. It was IBM rethinking who we are and what do we do and what value do we create. We assemble information, we help people make better decisions so that the world can be better, and then they rebuilt the whole company around that concept. When I was at Aetna, we redefined a company that had been all about holding down healthcare costs into one, because we got a new CEO who was a doctor who believed this, that provides information and resources to help people make better decisions about their healthcare and financial security. And we changed the whole business model from cost control to providing physicians and patients with better information so they made better decisions, and it gave us an opportunity to remake the entire company. For each one of these areas that I'm going to be going through, we're going to have a progression path that kind of starts with definition. What is the brand? How do we define it? And this is not easy. We've got to work across the enterprise to make it be real, and then begin to publicize it, even communicate it, even if it's somewhat aspirational. And then as you progress through Pathfinder and Pacesetter, you get more into how do you make this real across the enterprise. We don't have time today to go into these in detail. I'm just introducing the concept to you. On Friday, we're going to do a deep dive into the progression paths and give you an opportunity to read them and think about them and react to them and tell us how they can be better. Okay, Second door in on corporate character is culture. This is, as we said, the CEO's biggest need, and there are major opportunities for CCOs to work with CHROs and others across the organization on culture change. It must be rooted in the values and beliefs and learned in important ways, but it has to be systematized and brought into the way the company operates in order to become real. A lot of our colleagues are doing this kind of work. Omar Zafrani at ADNOC is a good example. We had him on our stage at Spring Seminar, and we had a great podcast. Did we have a podcast, or was it a webinar? Webinar. Thank you. That we did, and I think you can still get access to that. And so there's a culture progression path as well, and again, we don't have time to go into those this morning. The third door is societal value. We've observed that there's increasing demands on our organizations to create societal value, not just customer and shareholder value, even from investors and employees and customers. And as we think about that, there are kind of three categories that we think about how do you create social value. First, your core business. In Aetna's case, how do you help people get access to the health care that they need? That's the business that we're in, and that's a societal good, right? ESG programs and policies are supporting the SDGs, if you will. The policies that we have that mitigate the negatives or contribute to positive change in society. And the third is public stands on social issues. An example of core business products and services, Ed Walsh will be here tomorrow, I think, to talk to us about the work that Philips is doing in this area with its core business products. And Ed will also have a good example of ESG programs and policies with the work that they're doing on circular economy. Public stands on social issues. This really emerged in the U.S. a couple of years ago in response to some religious freedom and bathroom bills in the United States, where companies' employees really demanded that they speak out and take a stand. And certain companies actually threatened to pull out of certain states that were about to legislate in ways that changed public policy. And so there became kind of a movement going on. As we've gone around the world, we found actually great interest in this. When we were at MEPRA, Middle East PR Association with Brian and Umaima, a year ago, Peter did a presentation at the request of MEPRA on this issue of public stands on issues. You wouldn't necessarily expect that companies in the Middle East would be thinking this way, maybe not necessarily on LGBTQ issues, but certainly on other kinds of issues where there's an opportunity for companies to speak out. A lot of companies took a stand in the wake of the issues that happened in Turkey regarding Saudi Arabia recently. We happened to be visiting Clarissa Holler at Siemens, and we arrived to meet with her, and she wasn't available. She was in some other place, and so we went into another room with her staff thinking, well, where could she be? You know, we had this appointment and everything. She came in with apologies a half an hour later and said, I'm so sorry, I was just in with Joe. He's made the decision not only to pull the senior delegation out, but pull our entire delegation out because he felt if we're going to take a stand, let's take a stand. A lot of companies sent people anyway, but Siemens felt, let's go all the way and take the stand. So, again, we'll have a progression path in terms of how you define, communicate, and then make it real across the company in each of these areas. Finally, let's move to the second part, which is earning stakeholder trust and stakeholder engagement in this era of weaponization of information. How do we do that? And the way we've thought about that, we've got the big three here as well. Content practices that earn trust, engaging and shaping the digital future, and then building out something we're calling ComTech. So, in terms of practices that earn trust, what can we do as communicators in face of this weaponization? Are there things that we can do to make sure that our information is credible and believable? Are there standards that we ought to adhere to? What are those? Maybe Paige should take a lead in working perhaps with other organizations and coming up with a set of standards that ought to be adhered to. Are bots, certainly we do have, our companies have, you call and you may get a voice on the end of the phone and it may not be a human voice. Is that okay? What's not okay? How do you do that? What's the ethical way to use technology to engage with people in a way that is credible and authentic and builds true human relationships? Secondly, in terms of the digital future, the platforms are under siege these days. We had the CCOs of these three on our stage at Spring Seminar talking about the work that they're doing, and we've had some really engaging conversations with them about how we can contribute to that. Third and most important, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this tomorrow and again on Friday, is CommTech. What do we mean? So over the past decade or more, something has emerged in the marketing sphere that they've called MarTech, which basically is a stack of technologies that's used to identify people, and you are all experiencing this, right down to the individual level. If you Google something, it'll follow you around. If you sign up for rewards programs, it knows who you are, and it's getting down to the individual level, who you are, what you like, what you want to get, and the offers come your way. And there's a stack of technologies that support that and professions around it. And the question that Rob Flaherty asked when we were first sort of starting out on this journey a year ago was, where's CommTech? What are we doing? Are we using the technologies in authentic and reasonable and appropriate ways to communicate with broader stakeholders than just customers? And how would we do that? So we've spent a lot of work trying to figure that out. And the fact of the matter is very few of our members are doing the whole thing. No one's at the pace setter level. There are people sort of starting from into the Pathfinder levels. A lot of us who aren't even barely at the professional level yet. But there's work to be done here, and we've done a lot of work trying to figure out and understand what that is and what the possibilities are. And again, we'll be talking about that over the next couple of days. So that's the overview. We are, as I said at the outset, looking for your input. We are also doing partnerships with APCO on a global survey, which has already gone out to page members and page up members. If you didn't notice it in your inbox, please go back and look for it and find it and respond. We are also distributing it through partners, including EACD, APAC-D, MEPRA, Corporate Excellence, Harbor Club, Entreprise Media, China. Who are we distributing through? Suchin. It won't be just a page survey, but it'll be a global communicator survey that will enrich and give us a sense of where people are on all these progression paths in all these areas and tell us what we're missing. The final report will be out before the annual conference in September. It will take the form of a user's guide or a user's manual, because our members have told us that our thought leadership work in the past is great, high level, theoretical, strategic, but how do I do it? That's why we've got these progression paths. We're trying to get clearer about what does it look like in practice, and how can we share with each other and learn from each other. And that's why it's so important to us that you help us fill out these progression paths and make them real. So that's my overview. I hope I didn't sort of inundate you with it, but we'll have a lot of time to get into it in more depth and detail over the next couple of days. I want to thank Jan Peter again for getting us started with a great overview and a context for the conversations we'll be having. Welcome to all of you. We now have about 25 minutes to have a little bit of refreshment and break and start to get to know each other a little bit, and then we'll come back and dig in to more of the content. Okay? Thank you very much. We're on break.